Hello, everybody. I'm Hope.
And I'm Mark.
Welcome to This Week in Aviation podcast, brought to you by Aviator DB. Today is Friday, April 3rd, 2026.
So, Hope, what have you been up to this week?
Oh man, Mark. Okay, so I finally got my multi-engine rating finished up on Tuesday.
Wait, finally? You've been working on that for what, 3 months?
4 months. I kept getting weathered out for my check ride. But yeah, took it in a Duchess, a Beechcraft Duchess, out at Van Nuys.
Nice. How'd the check ride go?
Well, here's the thing. The DPE decides to pull the left engine right at rotation. Like literally as I'm lifting off.
At rotation? That's aggressive.
Right, so I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be interesting. Blue line's at 78 knots. I'm accelerating through about 75, and boom, left engine goes to zero thrust. Had to keep it on the runway, abort the takeoff.
Smart. Some people try to power through that.
Yeah, no thanks. I like my certificate and my life. But then he goes, good decision. Let's do it again, but this time I'll wait till you're at blue line plus 5.
Ah, so he was testing your decision-making first.
Exactly. Second time around, we're at 83 knots. He pulls it. And now I've got enough speed to actually fly the airplane. Did the whole drill, dead foot, dead engine, mixtures, props, throttles, feather the prop, secure the engine.
How was the single engine work? That's where people usually get nervous.
Actually not bad. The Duchess is pretty docile on one engine. We did some single engine approaches back into Van Nuys. And the hardest part was just staying ahead of the airplane. You know how busy that airspace gets.
Oh yeah. Van Nuys is like, what's their operation count these days?
Something like 200,000 movements a year. It's insane. We're doing a single engine ILS to 16 right, and Tower's machine gunning instructions at everyone. Duchess 4-2 Papa, keep your speed up, citation behind you. Cherokee turning base, extend downwind. I'll call your base. Helicopter 5 Lima Mike, remain north of the 101.
Classic Van Nuys.
But hey, if you can handle single engine ops in that zoo, you can handle them anywhere, right?
Fair point. So you passed?
I did. Though I will say when we shut down and he said, congratulations, my legs were shaking. 4 hours in that airplane, most of it on one engine.
4 hours? Jeez.
Yeah, he was thorough. But you know what was wild? After we landed, we're walking back to the FBO, and he goes, 20 years ago I wouldn't have pulled an engine at rotation like that. But with all these runway incursions lately. Yeah, he said he wants his multi-students thinking about abort scenarios constantly now. Said after LaGuardia, after Reagan National, he's changed how he teaches engine failures.
That's actually really sobering.
It is. Which, speaking of that whole situation, I saw you've been digging into those ATC numbers.
Oh, Hope. The numbers that came out this week, it's worse than we thought. Way worse.
That's our first big story today, right?
Yeah, and honestly, after you see this data, you're going to understand why your DPE is drilling abort procedures differently now.
All right, well, let's get into it. Because I've been seeing headlines all week about this Aviator DB analysis. And the numbers look scary.
Scary doesn't even cover it. Okay, so here's what happened. Aviator DB, and this is why their database is so valuable. They went through 6 years of NASA ASRS reports. That's the Aviation Safety Reporting System, where pilots and controllers file confidential safety reports.
Right, the get-out-of-jail-free reports.
Exactly. File a report about a safety issue, you get immunity from FAA enforcement. So people actually report stuff. And what Aviator DB found? Look, we had 2 fatal runway collisions in 14 months. Reagan National last January 2025, 67 dead. LaGuardia March 23rd, 2 pilots dead.
Which we'll talk about more later.
Right. But here's the thing, these weren't freak accidents. The data shows this was predictable. Near mid-air collisions are up 61% since 2019.
Wait, 61%?
61%. We went from 410 reported near misses in 2019 to 660 in 2025. And before you ask, no, it's not because we're flying that much more. Traffic in 2024 was only up 5.5%.
So traffic goes up 5%, but near misses go up 60%? That math doesn't.
It doesn't work, right? And here's where it gets worse. Critical runway incursions, well, that's the bad ones where collision was barely avoided. Those are up 131%.
Double?
More than double. 54 in 2019, 125 in 2025. And get this. The ones attributed to ATC errors increased by 94%.
Okay, but maybe controllers are just reporting more? Like maybe the culture changed and they're being more transparent?
That's what I thought too. But no. Here's the smoking gun. Workload citations. When controllers file these reports, they can cite factors. In 2019, workload was mentioned in 1.1 per thousand reports. In 2024, 25.8 per thousand.
Wait. Break that down for me.
23 times more often, controllers are saying, I couldn't handle the workload safely. 23-fold increase, Hope.
That's not a statistical blip.
No, it's not. And when you dig into the actual reports, controllers working 5 sectors with 2 people. 25 aircraft on frequency when the limit should be 15. Mandatory 6-day weeks, mandatory overtime.
Are we talking about specific facilities or is this system-wide?
System-wide. But the worst are the major hubs. New York TRACON, SoCal TRACON, Atlanta Center. One controller wrote, and I'm quoting, I have no idea what to do with all these aircraft.
When was that written?
October 2025, 5 months before LaGuardia.
Jesus.
And here's what really gets me. Remember that LaGuardia pilot who filed a report last August? He wrote, LGA is starting to feel like DCA did before the accident.
7 months before the crash.
7 months. The warnings were all there. And look, I get it. The FAA says they're hiring. They're running these recruitment campaigns. They're fast-tracking training. But the numbers don't lie. They're down 3,544 fully certified controllers from their own target.
How does that happen?
Because they're losing controllers faster than they can train them. The pipeline produces about 1,000 certified controllers a year. They lose 1,300 to retirement and resignations.
So they're going backwards.
Every year they fall further behind. And meanwhile, airlines are adding flights, airports are adding routes, everyone's acting like the system can handle it.
But it can't.
It literally cannot. And here's what makes me angry. After Reagan National, the NTSB issued 50 recommendations. 50. Congress passed this Alert Act that was supposed to fix things, but they didn't mandate ADS-B in for airliners. They didn't address the staffing math problem. They just rearranged deck chairs.
Okay, but help me understand something. Other countries manage similar traffic volumes, right? Like, London's airspace is incredibly complex, but they don't have this crisis. What are we doing wrong?
Great question. So Europe uses a different model. They have Eurocontrol, which coordinates across countries, but each country runs its own ATC. And critically, they staff at 115% of minimum. We run chronically understaffed.
Wait, we plan to be understaffed.
We plan to run lean, assuming everyone works overtime to fill gaps. It's been that way for decades, but now with the retirement wave, with COVID burnout, with controllers just saying, no more overtime, I'm exhausted, the model broke.
And people are dying because of it.
2 major accidents in 14 months, both preventable. Both preceded by warnings in the ASRS data.
What about the tech solutions? Everyone talks about next gen, digital towers, AI assistants.
Sure, eventually. But next gen has been 5 years away for 20 years. And even if we had it tomorrow, you still need humans in the loop. A digital system doesn't help if you don't have enough people to monitor it.
Every listener getting on a plane needs to understand this.
Here's the reality. The system usually works. Your flight today is probably fine, but we're operating on margins that are way too thin. When everything goes right, it's okay. When one thing goes wrong, weather, equipment failure, someone calls in sick, suddenly controllers are managing chaos.
And that's when planes hit fire trucks on runways.
Exactly, which brings us to LaGuardia.
Actually, before we get to LaGuardia, I want to talk about that Delta incident in Sao Paulo, because that's a different kind of crisis. Not systemic failure, but mechanical failure. And honestly, it shows what happens when crews are trained right.
Yeah, let's do that first. Because you're right, it's a good contrast.
Okay, so Saturday night, March 29th, Delta Flight 104 is taking off from Sao Paulo, headed to Atlanta. Airbus A330, 272 passengers, 14 crew. Big airplane, full flight.
PW 4000 engines, right?
Correct, Pratt & Whitney 4000s. And as they're rolling down the runway, they're committed. They're at V1. They're rotating. The left engine basically explodes.
Uncontained failure.
Apparently, witnesses on the ground see flames, sparks, chunks of metal flying off. There's video from the terminal that shows this trail of fire behind the airplane as it climbs out.
That's terrifying.
Right? But here's where training kicks in. The crew, and we don't have their names yet, they immediately declare the emergency, shut down the left engine, and instead of trying to land immediately, they climb to 4,500 feet.
Smart. Get some altitude, get some time.
Exactly. They fly this racetrack pattern, basically elongated ovals, while they run checklists. And think about what's happening in that cockpit. You've got engine failure warnings, probably fire warnings. You're on one engine with a full load of fuel, and you've got almost 300 people behind you.
Plus whatever damage the engine did when it came apart.
Right, they don't know if they have hydraulic damage, control surface damage, nothing. All they know is the left engine is gone, and they need to get this thing back on the ground.
How long were they up?
About 10 minutes total. They did maybe 2 circuits of the pattern while configuring for landing, and they put it down perfect. Smooth landing, everyone evacuates, no injuries.
On one engine.
On one engine, at max landing weight. That's not easy in an A330.
No, it's not. Those things are heavy.
And meanwhile, the debris from the engine started a brush fire next to the runway. The airport fire crews had to deal with that, while also standing by for the emergency landing.
Okay, so what failed? Do we know?
Preliminary reports say compressor stall, but that's like saying the engine stopped working. The real question is why. These PW4000s have millions of flight hours. They're mature technology.
But they've had issues, haven't they?
Yeah, there was that United 772 incident in 2018. Denver to Honolulu, similar failure. Fan blade separation, chunks through the cowling.
I remember that. Landed safely, too.
Right, and after that, there were inspections, service bulletins, the whole 9 yards. So either this is a different failure mode, or something got missed in maintenance.
What's Delta saying?
Nothing specific yet, just cooperating fully with investigators. The airplane's still sitting in Sao Paulo. November 813, November Whiskey. It's been there all week.
They're not flying it home.
No way. The ANAC, that's Brazil's aviation authority. They've got it locked down. They're working with the FAA and Pratt & Whitney to figure out what happened.
This could trigger an AD.
That's what I'm thinking. If they find a systemic issue, faulty fan blade, bad inspection criteria, whatever, every PW4000 could be looking at mandatory checks.
That's a lot of airplanes.
A 330s, 767s, 777s. We're talking hundreds of aircraft worldwide.
But here's what gets me about this story. Yes, engine failed catastrophically. Yes, it was dangerous. But the system worked. The engine is designed to fail safe. Even an uncontained failure shouldn't bring down the airplane. The crew is trained for this exact scenario. They did exactly what they were supposed to do.
Nobody died.
Nobody even got hurt. Compare that to LaGuardia, where the system failed at multiple levels and 2 pilots are dead.
That's the difference between mechanical failure and human system failure.
Exactly. Engines can be fixed. Procedures can be updated. But when your ATC system is so understaffed that controllers are making basic errors...
Speaking of which...
Yeah, let's talk about LaGuardia. And specifically, let's talk about Air Canada's CEO essentially being forced to resign over a condolence video.
Was it really about the video, though?
Okay, so here's what happened. March 23rd, 11:40 at night. Air Canada Jazz Flight 8646. It's a CRJ 900 operated by Jazz Aviation, which is Air Canada's regional subsidiary, is on short final to runway 31 at LaGuardia.
Full airplane?
Relatively full flight from Montreal. They're coming in from Montreal, routine flight, weather's fine, and as they're about to touch down, there's a Port Authority fire truck crossing the runway.
Just crossing an active runway.
In front of a landing aircraft. The CRJ hits the truck broadside. Both pilots are killed instantly. Antoine Forrest from Quebec, Mackenzie Gunther from Toronto. 41 passengers and crew injured, plus 2 officers in the fire truck.
How does this happen? I mean, basic question. How does a fire truck end up on an active runway with a plane landing?
So here's what we know. The fire truck was responding to an emergency. There was an aircraft on the field that needed assistance. Tower actually cleared the truck to cross the runway.
Wait, so the controller gave them permission to cross?
They did. But then the situation changed. The controller realized there was a conflict with the incoming aircraft and called out, "Stop, stop, stop," on the radio.
And the truck kept going.
The truck continued across the runway. Now, we don't know for sure why. It's possible they didn't hear the call. Or they might not have realized the command was directed at them, since they had literally just been cleared to cross moments earlier.
That's a really confusing situation. You get cleared, you start moving, and then seconds later someone's yelling, "Stop."
Exactly. And this is where it gets into the systemic issues. The truck didn't have a transponder. There was no requirement for one. So the ASDEX ground radar, which tracks everything on the airport surface, couldn't identify or track it as precisely as an aircraft.
Airport vehicles don't need transponders?
Not required. Which is something a lot of people are now saying needs to change after this.
So you've got a controller managing an emergency response, clearing vehicles, and tracking inbound aircraft all at the same time.
At 11:40 at night, probably minimum staffing because it's late. When you're working combined positions, juggling emergency coordination and normal traffic, the margin for error is razor thin.
And this goes right back to the staffing crisis we were just talking about.
100%. More people in that tower, maybe someone catches the conflict a few seconds earlier. Maybe there's a dedicated ground controller who's only watching surface traffic. But when you're short-staffed, one person is doing 3 jobs.
Okay, but let's talk about the CEO thing. Because that's where this gets weird.
Michael Rousseau. 68 years old, been with Air Canada 18 years. 2 pilots just died. Airlines in crisis mode. He records a condolence video, in English only, with French subtitles.
And one of the pilots was from Quebec.
Antoine Forrest, francophone, Quebecer. And Quebec loses their minds. Premier Legault calls it insensitive. Prime Minister Carney piles on. Suddenly, it's not about dead pilots, it's about language politics.
But is that fair? I mean, two people died. The language of the condolence video seems like.
A distraction? Yeah, I agree, but here's the context. Russo has been in hot water over language before. In 2021, he admitted he'd lived in Montreal for 14 years and couldn't speak French. Said he was too busy to learn.
Oh,
Right? And Air Canada, by law, the Official Languages Act, has to provide service in both languages. It's not optional.
so this was like the last straw.
Apparently. March 30th, 3 days after the runway reopens, Russo announces he's retiring, effective third quarter 2026.
That's pretty fast for a CEO departure.
Very fast. And get this, Air Canada immediately announces that French language skills are now mandatory for his replacement.
So they're admitting it was about the language thing.
Or they're using the language thing as cover. Because here's what nobody's talking about. Air Canada has had multiple ground incidents. They had that near miss at San Francisco a few years back. They've had runway incursions at Toronto. Now 2 pilots are dead at LaGuardia.
You think the board wanted him out anyway?
I think when you have a fatal accident, boards start asking hard questions. The language controversy gave them political cover to make a change.
But does changing the CEO fix anything? The ATC system is still broken.
No, it doesn't fix anything. That's what makes me crazy about this. Everyone's focused on whether the CEO speaks French while the actual problem, controllers clearing vehicles onto active runways, goes unaddressed.
Although runway 31 has been closed for 6 days for repairs.
Yeah, let's talk about that impact. Runway 31 is about 35% of LaGuardia's capacity. When you close it for 6 days, the airport basically can't function normally.
How many flights got canceled?
Over 3,000 flights canceled, 450,000 passengers affected. And remember, LaGuardia doesn't have extra capacity. It's slot controlled, maxed out on a good day.
So those flights don't just shift to other runways.
They can't. You either cancel or divert to Newark or JFK, which are also maxed out. It was chaos. 6 days of absolute chaos.
And all because somebody put a truck where an airplane was about to be.
All because the system failed at the most basic level. And hope. I keep coming back to this. The pilot who wrote LGA is starting to feel like DCA did before the accident. He knew. Controllers knew. The warning signs were all there.
7 months before it happened.
7 months. And now 2 pilots are dead, a CEO is out, and we're having a national conversation about French subtitles instead of fixing the actual problem.
Which is that we don't have enough controllers.
We do not have enough controllers, and until we fix that, these accidents will keep happening.
All right, before we go, let's run through some of the other stuff that caught our eye this week.
Yeah, speaking of runway incursions, did you see what happened at JFK?
Oh, the China Airlines thing?
March 3rd. China Airlines 777 holding short of runway 4 left, but acknowledges clearance meant for Korean Air starts rolling as British Airways. 787 is cleared for takeoff.
Wait, they took someone else's clearance.
They acknowledged a clearance meant for a completely different airplane, and they start rolling onto the runway just as British Airways 787 is cleared for takeoff on that same runway.
No way.
Tower catches it, tells the British Airways to hold, crisis averted. But hope, this is exactly the kind of thing that happens when frequencies are congested and everyone's rushed.
How do you even mistake someone else's call sign for yours?
I mean, if you're expecting a clearance, if the frequency's busy, if your task's saturated, sometimes you hear what you expect to hear.
That's terrifying.
It is. And look, JFK is one of our busiest airports. They're running at capacity all day, every day. One miscommunication like this.
It's LaGuardia all over again.
Exactly. The system caught it this time. Next time, who knows?
Speaking of near misses, we had another military helicopter situation. This one in California.
Another one?
March 24th, United 737 coming into John Wayne Airport in Santa Ana. They're at 2,000 feet on final. And suddenly, TCAS alert. California National Guard Black Hawk crosses right through their approach path.
Are you kidding me?
525 feet vertical, 1,422 feet lateral. The United crew leveled off at 1,425 feet to avoid it.
This is less than a year after Reagan National.
Right? And supposedly we have all these new separation requirements for military helicopters near civilian airports. But here we are.
Let me guess. The Black Hawk was returning from a training mission, wasn't talking to approach control.
Returning to Los Alamitos Joint Forces Training Base. And yeah, coordination breakdown somewhere. The FAA opened a formal investigation.
Good. But investigations don't prevent collisions. Actual separation does.
I will say, though, TCS worked. The system alerted, the crew responded, nobody died.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be relying on last-second collision avoidance systems. That's like saying, well, the airbag's deployed, so the intersection design is fine.
Fair point.
Military training routes and civilian approach paths should not overlap. Period. This isn't complicated.
Switching gears. Did you see the United flight attendant contract?
Oh man, the money they got.
Top scale hits $100 an hour by the end of the agreement. That's industry leading.
Plus $740 million in bonuses spread across 30,000 flight attendants.
But here's what's interesting. It's not just about money. They got boarding pay finally. Starting May 31st, if it's ratified, they get paid when passengers are boarding.
About time.
Right, for decades, flight attendants have been working for free during boarding. That's when most of the conflicts happen, most of the stress.
Most of the injuries, too. People shoving bags, hitting flight attendants with carry-ons.
And they were doing it for free. They also got sit pay. If there's more than 2.5 hours between flights, they get 50% pay for sitting around.
Quality of life stuff.
Exactly. And restored business class hotels. The company had been downgrading crew hotels to save money.
You know what this tells me? Labor has leverage right now. Airlines can't find enough people, can't retain people.
Well, yeah. Would you want to be a flight attendant for $50,000 a year dealing with unruly passengers?
No thanks.
So now it's potentially 6 figures at top scale. That changes the equation.
Other airlines are going to have to match this.
They'll have to. American Delta, their flight attendants are watching this deal closely.
Speaking of airlines making moves, British Airways is going back to Melbourne.
After 20 years.
20 years. They pulled out in '06, and now suddenly Melbourne's viable again?
Well, think about what's changed. Middle East conflicts have people avoiding those hubs. Singapore and Cathay are capacity constrained. There's an opening.
Plus, Australians have money, and they want to travel.
The route's interesting, too. They're flying London to Kuala Lumpur to Melbourne. 21 hours total on a 787-9.
That's a long day.
But daily service. And they're timing it for Australian Open, Formula One in Melbourne. Smart scheduling.
800 to 1,100 pounds return. That's not bad for that distance.
It's not. And if you're trying to avoid the Middle East or you don't want to deal with connections.
One stop to Melbourne starts looking pretty good.
Plus, BA needs the revenue. They've been struggling with their long-haul network.
Everyone has. But this feels like airlines are finally confident again. Speaking of which, China Eastern just dropped $15 billion on Airbus jets.
Billion with a B.
101 aircraft. Mix of A320neos, A321neos, and, this is interesting, A321XLRs.
First Chinese state carrier to order the XLR.
Right? That's an 8-hour narrow body. They could fly Shanghai to Darwin, Shanghai to Dubai.
Opens up a lot of thin routes that don't justify a wide body.
And it's all Airbus. China's basically given up on buying Boeing narrow bodies.
Can you blame them after the MAX situation?
I mean, no, but this is devastating for Boeing. Airbus got over 90% of Chinese narrow body orders last year.
The geopolitics are part of it too, right?
Oh, absolutely, but still. 100 planes, all Airbus. Boeing's got to be watching that and just... oof.
Deliveries don't start until 2028, though. That's a long wait.
Everyone's back ordered. If you want new aircraft before 2030, good luck.
Which is why airlines are keeping 30-year-old 737s flying.
And why passengers are stuck in old cabins with broken screens.
The glamour of modern aviation.
You know, Hope, it's been a heavy week. Between the LaGuardia crash, the ATC numbers, these near misses.
Yeah, it feels like the system's really straining.
But then you also have things working right. That Delta crew in Sao Paulo, TCAS preventing a collision in Santa Ana. When aviation works, it works incredibly well.
It's just those margins we talked about.
Right. We're operating with no buffer. And that's not sustainable.
Next week's going to be interesting. The NTSB should have preliminary findings on LaGuardia. The Brazil investigation on that engine failure should have updates.
And who knows what else will happen between now and then.
In this business, anything.
For the latest aviation news and to find out just about everything imaginable about aviation, visit our website at aviatordb.com.
Thanks for joining us this week, everyone. Fly safe out there.
And remember, if you see something weird, say something. Those ASRS reports matter.
They really do. See you next week.
Later, everybody.